Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So, I want to focus today on two sections of our Torah portion, that are incredibly innovative. One, if you know this Torah portion, you're going to be able to key into it right away. We'll talk about it. But the other, I think, is a little bit more subtle. This week, we talk about, it's the Parashat of Pinhas, and it has a number of high points in the story. It's actually a very rich Torah portion. It ends or continues the story from last week about Pinhas, who was a zealot and took it upon himself to literally execute justice and step in where nobody else would. And we've talked about Pinhas before. The end of the Torah portion is actually one of the most frequently read sections of Torah. It's all of the holidays and the sacrifices that connect to the holidays. So chapter 28 into chapter 29, we read that every holiday, Rosh Chodesh, that is our maftir, that is where our maftir comes from. And so people forget about the middle. They forget about the middle, and that's actually what we're going to be reading about this week. The first innovative story is what is called the section of the Daughters of Tzlofchad. You can find it on page 926 in your red Humashim. It actually starts on the previous page, 925, the beginning of chapter 27. And without going through all of the details, basically it is a story of a challenge to the inheritance laws that we have within the Torah, right? The Torah is very clear that inheritance goes from father to son. The question is, what happens if there are no sons? And Tzlofchad had only daughters, no sons. And what was supposed to happen was that land was supposed to basically go back to the tribe. And the daughters actually were left without any inheritance. They brought this complaint to Moshe. Moshe actually was unsure of what to do, brought the complaint to God, and God said, if you look on page, hold on. Yeah, but I'm looking for the actual verse.
The Lord said to Moses.
Yeah, here it is. Verse 6, right? Ken benot tzlofchad dovrot, right? They were right. Listen to them. So the first innovation that we see in our Torah is this section on inheritance. Now, by the way, later on, another challenge comes to this, because what winds up happening is if the daughters of Tzlofchad then marry somebody outside of the tribe, that land then goes outside of the tribe. And so there's now a caveat that's put on later on saying they have to marry within the tribe to keep the land within the tribe, right? And in the time of the Bible, that was a very important piece, that all of the land stayed within the particular tribes. So that is the first innovation that we have in this week's Torah portion. But the second innovation comes on page 928, immediately after this. Verse 12, God said to Moses, "Go up the heights and view the land that I have given to the Israelite people. When you have seen it, you too shall be gathered to your kin." So this is where God is telling Moses, your time is now over. Aaron has died. Miriam has died already. Moshe is the last of that family. And so what does Moshe do when he hears that? And he knows then that he is not going to be taking the people into the land of Israel. He, on verse 15, says, let the Lord, source of breath of all flesh, appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall take them out and bring them in, so that the Lord's community may not be like the sheep that have no shepherd. So what's Moses asking? He wants a succession plan, right? He wants to establish a succession plan. Now, we look at this and we're going to say, all right, what's innovative about this? So that's my question to you. What's innovative about this? Yeah, right? It wasn't his son. Every other succession plan we've seen so far, right? It's about parent to child. But this is not the case. Now, there's some rabbis and some commentators who were sort of who put into Moses' mouth, he was hoping that it was going to be his son. Right? That might be there, because that's the normal way of doing things. But God comes and says, no, it's not going to be Gershon, it's not going to be your son. Instead, it's going to be Joshua. Why Joshua and not Gershon? What's the innovation here? Neil?
Joshua was essentially a general in charge of an army.
Well, even before, yes, he became a general in charge of the army, but before that, he was Moses' disciple.
Yes.
He was Moses' number 2. He was doing the job, right? He was doing the job. It wasn't, just because he had the blood, the job is going to go to him. God said, this is the right person for the job. And therefore, that is the person who needs to step forward. Yes?
There's a nice Aggadata, Mishnah that Yehoshua was really just kind of a simple guy before this. And they say, he's the one who got there early and he set up the chairs and he kind of cleaned up the room and got everything ready.
Yeah.
He was making sure, we see him as this general, to Neil's point, but really they said he was kind of a simple guy, first one in, last one out.
He became a general because ultimately that's what he had to do. He had to lead the people in a time of conquest, right? In a time of battle.
But he was willing to do pretty much anything, including setting up the chairs.
Correct. So there were 2 things that made Joshua stand out, right? 2 things that made Joshua stand out. First, we go back to the story of the spies, right? And Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 people that came back, not, by the way, with a positive report. They all came back with a positive report. They all said, yes, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's beautiful. It's great. But the other 10 spies said, the people are giants. We're going to look like insects to them. We're never going to be able to take over the land. We should just go home. We should go back to Egypt and forget it. And Joshua and Caleb both said, well, in fact, yes, those people are big, but don't worry, we can handle it. Right? So that's the first piece of it. But the second piece, and I think that's the ikar here, that's the essence of what's being said, is the job goes to the person who most fits the job, right? It's not about dynasty, it's not about blood in that sort of way. And actually, Rabbi Sachs picks up on this a little bit, which is interesting because the Hasidic community deals with this a little bit different than I think the modern Orthodox and other people who are where the rabbi title in the Hasidic community very often is dynastic. And that's not to say that the son isn't going to be a good rabbi, doesn't have knowledge, but it's not necessarily the best person for the job. Rabbi Sachs actually comes and says the innovation here, and I agree, the innovation here is that all of the laws of inheritance, of how we normally think about it, when it comes to this side of things, are gone. And it goes to the person who's going to do the best. And that's why I would argue it follows immediately after the section of the daughters of Zelophehad. Because I would argue both of these sections are saying the same thing. Who is right to inherit the property of this father? The family, the daughters, right? And you wouldn't think that in the way that we normally think about inheritance laws, but they're the right people because they're the family, and that's where it should stay. By the same token, who is the right person to inherit this job from Joshua? It's not Gershon, it's not just from Moses. It's not Gershon, it's not just his son, because he's his son. It's Joshua, because he has put in the time, the energy. One of the things that I love, and this happens to be in his book called Covenant and Conversation, on the book of Numbers, Rabbi Sachs actually takes this a step further. By the way, in today's day and age, I almost decided to go here. We could have all sorts of great conversations about politics, right? Of who should be and all sorts of, but that's not where I'm going to go. But where Rabbi Sachs goes on this, and I agree, is he talks about the transmission of Judaism, right? And when a parent wants to transmit that Judaism to their child, to the next generation, he argues by this, we can't just say, well, because they're my child, well, of course they're going to be Jewish. Of course they're going to live a life of Judaism and live a life that's connected to Judaism. It doesn't work that way, right? We don't inherit Judaism that way. Judaism goes to those people who have put in the time, who have put in the effort, who have made that connection back into that tradition. That's how Judaism is passed. And he's arguing from these two sections in Parashat Pinhas, from the daughters of Zelophehad and the establishment of Joshua as the next generation, he's arguing for how we, as the previous generation, need to set it up so that the next generation can be ready, can do what they need to do, right? It is actually quite innovative and very different from anything. He says something very interesting, and I can tell you it is true in my family. He says that with the exception of the ultra-Orthodox, where you've got that dynastic succession, he said, very few children of rabbis become rabbis. It doesn't just happen that way. I will tell you, neither of my children have any interest at all, right? I mean, they have interest in Judaism, but they have no interest in becoming rabbis, right? And so this sense of, well, I'm a rabbi, you're going to be a rabbi, that's an old world sort of way of looking at it. And to some degree, these sections of Torah come to overturn that and say that's not the way we should be looking at it. We should be looking at how we pass those things down by A, what's right, who's right for the job, and then B, how we set that up, how we allow them to engage in it. Because Joshua would not have been able to take that role had Moshe not brought him under his wing. Moshe was prepping him all the way this entire time. And therefore, the answer that God gave is now the obvious answer. Well, of course it's going to be Joshua. But it's actually innovative. It's actually a chiddush in the way that we normally do things. Any comments? Michal?
That's just a little thing, but I'm just curious about the Asher Ruach. Is that a unique descriptor for Joshua in the Tanakh? Or is it used other places if you happen to know?
Yeah, so what's interesting is this investiture of Joshua, right, with the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, and there's actually sort of a laying on of hands almost, right, when it actually happens a little bit later on. There is a parallel to that actually in rabbinic ordination. As one rabbi sort of passes on that tradition to the next generation, we actually model, most places that I know of, model that on this, not this moment, but what's going to happen later on in Deuteronomy when it actually happens. Right now it's just the announcement of it. We model it on that. And there's this passing on, so to speak, of the divine spirit from one person to the next, from one generation to the next. That's actually very powerful. So this idea of Ruach Elohim, of the Spirit of God, it's mentioned here, but then picked up in Deuteronomy in a very powerful way. Did you want to make a comment?
Well, I think also when they were building the Mishkan, they were calling in people with Ruach Elohim, like I think Bezalel.
Yes.
And that mentions in the wise women weavers that had this spirit invested, this vesture of spirit. But just to your point about the rabbinic ordination, the word is actually visamachta,
Mm-hmm.
with the samet, not a sin. Yadecha, and that's where I think smicha comes from.
Correct.
Which also has to do with laying your hands on the korbanot, and there's a whole section of the korbanot, and it all really does tie together so beautifully. Like we think it's like 1, 2, 3. Like we think that these are discrete things or issues in this parsha, but
They're all tied together.
They're very tied together with this idea of, I think, karov,
Right.
everything bringing things together.
So for those who couldn't hear Diana, or for those at home, what she talked about is that the root of the word visamachta, right? You will lay your hands, right? Put your hands on. That is the word in Hebrew for ordination, right? I received smicha. It's the same Hebrew word, right? When you ordain a rabbi, that's what happens. And so it connects back to this, and Diana is correctly also saying that it's the way that we talk in terms of the priests with the korbanot, with the sacrifices. Now, I don't want to go into the whole idea of being a leader and being a sacrifice, because that's a whole different thing. But yeah, these are all interconnected with each other. Any other comments before we get to our Torah reading? We're actually going to read these sections today. Yes, Neil.
Just curiosity, did Moshe's sons want the job?
We don't know.
Because you suggest yours don't want my kids don't want to do what I do.
Right. Neil's asking, did Moshe's son want the job? The text is silent about that. We don't know. We really don't know. My assumption is probably not, but I don't know. I don't know. And look, there's a whole other aspect of this that is powerful for us to understand, which is, right, Aharon and the kihunah, the priesthood, does go parent to child. But Torah and the ability to learn and to be a leader doesn't. And those two have always been split in our tradition, right? Between Aharon and Moshe. From the very, very beginning, those were two different ideas, right? The transmitter of Torah, that goes through the person who's best able to do that. When it comes to certain rituals, well, there may be, this sense of, for the person who's been involved in helping and being at the synagogue, that'll go. We actually see that here, right? When I first got here, we had Jose Sr. as being the one who takes care of the synagogue, and Jose Jr. was, a little guy who followed him around, right? Not so much, he was a little older. And now, Junior's the one who takes care of the synagogue, right? So there is that sense of passing down. But that's because Junior wanted it. That's because Junior trained for it. Back again, you have to have both. All right.